In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a surrealistic photo composite to transform your photos from this to this. Let's find out how. And thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. So first off, our inspiration for this project comes from Rosie Hardy. She creates some really awesome surrealistic and fantasy-driven self-portraits to create some unique worlds with her images. We saw this photo and thought it'd be fun to do our own take on it. What's great about this type of project is you can easily do it yourself with just a little bit of Photoshop and transform your photos into whatever you can imagine. So if you want, you can shoot your own photos for this, but I want to keep the focus on Photoshop for this video, so I'm going to source my photos online. I'm going to head to pexels.com, which has a large library of free to use images. So to start, I want a photo of a person in front of a wall. I'm just going to type in wall in the search box and see what comes up. I think a few of these could work, but I like this photo because I love the texture of the wall. And with the subject facing away from the camera, it adds a mysterious element to the image. So let's download this photo and bring it into Photoshop. I've linked all the assets I'm going to use for this video in the description, so if you want to follow along, check that out. So I'll be working in Photoshop CC 2020, but you should be able to do everything with just about any Photoshop version that you have. The first thing that I want to do is select our subject. Click on the magic wand or quick selection tool in your toolbar, and then over here, click Select Subject. So the Select Subject tool has been out for a few years, and in Photoshop 2020, it works especially well. But if you don't have that tool, you can do it manually by hand with just the lasso tool or quick selection tool or any other selection tool that you like. Since it's done a nice job of selecting our subject, I'm going to click on Select and Mask. Here we can further refine the mask with the lasso tool or brush. You can also change your viewing mode. Just use whatever helps you see what you need to mask the best. So by default, these tools will add to your mask, and if you want to subtract any areas, hold Alt or Option on your keyboard when you're using the tool. I'm just going to go along the edges of the mask, touching it up to make sure we get all of our subjects selected. And then once I'm finished where it says Output To, I'll choose New Layer with Layer Mask. Now we can go ahead and turn our background layer back on. What I like about having a layer mask is we can always further refine the mask by clicking on the layer mask and then painting white to add to the mask or black to subtract from it. This way it's a non-destructive method to create masks. So let's go ahead and rename the layers to try and stay organized. Next, I'll select the wall layer and then use the lasso tool to draw the hole we want to create in the wall. I'm actually just going to load a selection that I made earlier, but take the time to get your whole selection looking just how you'd like. Since we want to keep everything else in the image except for that hole, we need to invert the selection. So I'm going to do this by going to Select, Inverse. Then I'll make a layer mask by clicking on this button. Okay, now that we have the hole, I'm going to bring in a second photo, which will bring in a whole new world to this composite. So when creating a composition like this, you want to keep in mind the perspective and the lighting of your main image, and you want the second photo to kind of be similar to that. So here we have a neutral camera perspective with this shot taken from eye level. So ideally our second photo will be pretty similar. Back on Pexels, I'll search for forest. Honestly, this first photo looks really cool and it should work well. So I'm going to download it and then drop it into Photoshop. And now let's drag the layer to the bottom and rename it. Okay, so now we have the basic elements of our image, but now we just have to make it look good. So if a hole was actually knocked out in this concrete wall, you would see cracks, you'd see chipped and crumbling concrete, and maybe even some building materials from the other side of the wall. So I grabbed this image from Pexels, and now I'm just gonna mask out a portion of it. Then I'll drop it below our hole layer and resize it and rotate it so it better fits along the hole in the wall. So obviously it doesn't match well right now. I can tell it's too high of contrast compared to the rest of the wall. So I'm going to fix that by adding a brightness and contrast adjustment layer. Click on this icon so the adjustment layer will only affect our concrete crumble. Then I'm going to turn the contrast all the way down. That's looking better. I'm gonna add a hue and saturation adjustment layer now, just to see if I can get the colors to match a little better. All right, I think it's looking good. I'll select the crumble and adjustment layers and group them together. We'll call it Crumble 1. Next, I'm gonna duplicate the group. I'll delete the layer mask on the crumble and now select a different part of the image to mask out. Then I'll position it over here. So there's a pretty hard edge between these two elements, so if we want, we can select our whole mask layer, and using a soft black brush, we can blend the mask in with the crumble below it. We can do the same with the other crumble as well. Okay, so next there's a few things to do. We need to roughen up the edges and also add cracks to the concrete. For both of these, we'll use brushes. For the cracks, I've downloaded them from Brush Easy and copied them into my brush preset folder for Photoshop. I also linked the brushes that I'm using in the description for this video. With the brush tool selected, we can open the brush preset picker and click the gear icon and then import brushes. Now I did that earlier, so I'm gonna skip that step. So for the cracks, let's create a new layer. Make sure flow and opacity are both set at 100. And then pick a dark color, almost black. Now right click on the canvas and select one of the cracks. Let's lower the size by a lot. And here we can also adjust the angle at which the brush will paint on. So start by painting along the edge of the hole and then change the size and the rotation and the brush itself to get some variation. Take your time and play around with all the different types of cracks until you have something that you feel looks realistic. Next, let's select the layer mask on our wall layer. For the brush preset, I'm going to navigate to Legacy Brushes, Thick, Heavy Brushes, and choose the Rough Round Bristle brush. I'll lower the brush size and go along the edge, painting with a black brush to roughen up the edges. Now hold Option or Alt on the layer mask and drag it to our cracks layer. This will remove any cracks that overlapped onto the hole itself. All right, it's looking pretty cool, but we need to add some more depth to make it look like an actual hole in the wall. I found this brick image from Pexels, so once again, I'm gonna mask out a section of the brick and then put it below my wall layer. Next, I'll add a new layer right above my brick layer. I'm going to use a soft almost black brush with the flow decreased to add a little bit of shadow between the wall and the bricks. This just helps add more depth and really sell the effect. So now I want to bridge the gap between the concrete and the forest worlds by adding some foliage in between. I found an image of some ivy and masked it out from the wall behind it. If you see a little halo around the edges of the ivy, first right-click on your layer mask and choose Apply Layer Mask. Then go to Layer, Matting, Defringe. A pixel value of 1 or 2 should be enough to remove the white halo. To help the ivy match the colors of the forest in the background, I'm going to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And click this icon to clip the adjustment layer to only affect the ivy. Play around with the values until you see the colors and lighting start to match better. So for this, I'm going to bump the hue to 3 and the saturation to 23 and the lightness to -10 looks good. So the lighting in this ivy image is completely different than the rest of our image. So I'm going to select the burn tool, and with midtone selected and the exposure set to 30%, I'm going to start painting over the ivy to darken it. All right, things are actually looking pretty good. I just want to add a few more elements to give it that final oomph. Okay, ready? Now.
Squarespace! All right, my first time making a website. I'm a little nervous, but I'm excited. Let's do this. I'm already done making my website. Are you surprised? I am.
I'm really impressed with Squarespace's blogging tools. Yay.
Whoa, they've got email campaigns? I'm totally gonna send one.
That was totally worth it.
Look at all this traffic overview. It's all right here. A year ago, I didn't think I could have my own beautiful website, but Squarespace made it so easy. Thank you.
This year, give yourself the gift of your own beautiful website with Squarespace and save 10% when you use the code MangoStreet at checkout. Head to the link in our description to get started. I'm going to create a new layer and fill it with black. Then I'll go to Filter, Render, Lens Flare. I'm going to go with the 105mm prime lens and then position the flare so that it will give the feeling like the sun is just out of frame. And brightness of around 80% should work well. Click OK. Then I'm going to change the blending mode to screen. This makes the black invisible and just leaves us with the lens flare itself. The flare is a little too cold, so I'm going to go to my adjustment layers and add a photo filter. Clip the photo filter, and with the warming filter selected, play around with the density until it looks good to you. Now, to give the final composite a more cohesive feeling, I want to add a gradient map to the entire image. I'll choose this warm neutral gradient and then lower the opacity to something like 5%. Finally, I'll add a color lookup adjustment layer. You can use any LUT you'd like. I'm going to load our MS Portrait LUT. And then lower the opacity of the layer until it looks good to you. All right, let's take a look at the before and after. Projects like these are a lot of fun and allows you to flex your creative muscle without even leaving your desk. And the more comfortable you become in Photoshop, the better. Do us a favor and hit that thumbs up button and consider subscribing if you haven't already. And we will see you in the next one. Bye.